Rob Zombie once stated that remakes were stupid and nobody should do them if they didn't improve upon the original. He then directed and wrote Halloween 2007. To be honest, this film has grown on me since 2007. I thought it was too intense, too shaky, and too rough. And now that I see it was just a style choice. It was Zombie's way of conveying terror and horror and make us feel like we were the victim, and it did that in a more visceral way than any of the other Halloween films. Michael in the Jamie trilogy felt like a supernatural force, but here he feels like a force of nature, molded by his past. Though once he stops talking, you never get any more development, and we really don't get any more development from anybody else either. But we'll get to that.
Put my mask back on. Michael, please put my mask back on. Come on, let's try to enjoy the day.
We might as well talk about Michael first, since he really is the most important part of the movie. The child actor portraying him does a really good job, and he makes Michael seem like a normal kid that was just put in a bad situation, and it's really interesting. I think he has a really good look in his eyes, and he's good at portraying emotions well without having to say anything.
I can stop you there. I gotta get back to work. You take it easy, Mikey.
That is something you need in a young Michael Myers, because you know he's going to grow up to be a hulking psychopath that murders people. But let's move on to adult Michael.
Yeah. Why is it?
His first mask, the red one, was a lot more creepy than his classic mask. I think that's because you know that Michael made it. But I wish he would have worn it for longer, just because it's so cool looking. I don't hate his classic mask, because it looks so much better than the mask from 4, 5, 6, H2O, and Resurrection. But I still feel like the mask misses on one important part, and that's the eyes. I hate being able to see Michael's eyes. I feel like it gives him some sort of human aspect that he has no business having. I believe that takes away from the shape. Zombie already humanized Michael in the first 50 minutes of the film. I don't think he needs to remind the audience that he used to be a tortured kid, especially with how brutal this Michael is. Tyler Mane's physicality is one of the best parts of this Michael, and humanizing this Michael sort of takes away from that. For me, the movie is really hamstrung because it is so gratuitous in some places. Practically everyone is exploitive, a sexual deviant, or a psychopath. And it really makes me question what type of people Rob Zombie thinks actually inhabit the world around us. Yes, there are rapists, racist rednecks, white trash welfare collectors, white trash strippers, sluts, stoners, bullies, etc. But it's really incredibly distracting and taking me out of this film. Now I get that Akkad and Carpenter told Zombie to make the movie his own, and I fully support directors developing a world where their people act a certain way or things work differently, because that can be interesting. But when you base your film in reality, I think it helps make it more scary. And this doesn't feel like reality.
Let's go, fucknut. Time to go.
Now, in the director's cut, the cut that presumably Rob Zombie had the most say in, and this is the cut that he would have wanted to go to theaters. In this cut, the worst scene in the entire franchise lives. The escape scene. 2 hillbillies rape an inmate in an attempt to piss off Michael. They take turns on the poor girl and play with Michael's mask, which is what sets him off. That scene is so mean-spirited and ghastly that I won't even show any footage from it. And yes, it is the director's cut. It's not what made it to theaters. But you have to assume this is what Rob Zombie's vision was. I'm all for horror movies being able to push boundaries. Usually they're done in a more, I don't want to say sensitive, but more nuanced way. Zombie trying to portray this was just disgusting. Another sad fact of this film is that Laurie Strode is characterized so little and with such a small time that I frankly barely care what's happening to her. We only see her for a couple minutes of screen time before the killings really start to ramp up and she becomes the final girl. She isn't really given any development but a few scenes that occur just before the massacre. And because so much time was put into Michael at the beginning, he's the only person we have any connection to. It's like he's the protagonist. People shouldn't exist to be victims, just as the places Michael goes shouldn't exist to just be his hunting grounds. It makes it so unbelievable. And when Zombie was interviewed for Halloween 25 Years of Terror, he said almost the exact same quote.
Audiences could be drawn to a villain that has no dialogue, no personality, no anything, because all the surrounding cast was full of it. Full of personality, full of everything, full of life, and you're really drawn into, Jamie Lee's character and Donald Pleasance, and you're like really, so you could have this faceless killer, and it was terrifying. But once they started making all the other people faceless too, then you had like faceless victims and faceless killers and faceless movie.
And it's not just with Laurie too. In the original, we were given a lot of time with Annie as well, and here we aren't. And she's played by one of the Halloween fans' most favorite actresses. It's strange because in the first film, we have so much time devoted to Michael creeping around, learning about various other characters like Loomis, like the sheriff, like Annie, like Laurie. It's strange to not have that, but then you have to remember that the second half of this film is pretty much the entire original Halloween film condensed into like 50 minutes. There's some huge logistical problems with this movie because of that. And I understand it's a reimagining. I understand this is how Zombie wanted to portray Michael and wanted to portray the character. But like I said before, Michael is the only one who gets developed at all. I think the film's biggest plus is its cinematography. There's no doubt in my mind that Rob Zombie knows how to direct a shot. Some of these shots can be very beautiful. The shaky cam can be a bit of a problem, but in general, it's only used when trying to convey Michael's strength. Zombie nails the feeling of late fall too. Warm colors during the day, cold colors at night, and ultimately it's one of the high points of the movie. So, Halloween from 2007. It isn't as terrible as I make it seem. It just really isn't my piece of cake, and I can respect that. So I'm going to give this film a 73 out of 100. Rob Zombie was given complete creative control over this film, and it shows. It could be a plus if you're into trailer trash, mentally scarred, and mostly terrible characters. I can be really hard on this movie, mostly because of how unlikable Laurie is. Mental illness, PTSD, and depression are all things I don't and I may never completely understand. But I think it's evident that Rob Zombie does not, or at least doesn't know how to portray these illnesses in a way that makes characters likable or at least tolerable. I've watched the director's cut in preparation for making this review. It is pretty much the only cut you can find in most video stores, and it is just oppressive to watch. Dead Meat has done a cut comparison on it, showing the differences between the cuts, and it gave me a greater perspective on the film. I want to see a less zombie cut of the film, with more likable protagonists, especially Laurie. Usually when you come across a definitive cut like this, it is usually better, has more gore and more kills, and makes the movie more fun to watch. But this is the opposite. It's less fun. That shouldn't be happening with a slasher flick. Now, I understand in a film like Hereditary, in which the entire premise of the film is based around the emotion of grief, that I shouldn't be having so much fun. In that film, the emotions are real and relatable. I personally have never been brutalized by a mass maniac, but I have grieved for many people in my life, and I can relate to those characters, but relating to Laurie here is very difficult. So, after Laurie shot Michael in the face, she is found walking down the street with a gun in her hand. After a very intense scene of her being treated for her wounds, We are given two of the worst characters that this series of movies has ever seen. These two drivers for the coroners are some of the worst written characters in a horror movie. Seeing as though most characters written like that are played for laughs, it's a little disturbing that these guys aren't. Of course, when you write dialogue like this,
man, she was F-I-N-E fine. Yeah, she still look fresh.
how can you depict satirical and dark comedy effectively? Maybe Zombie is trying to show us how people that have to deal with heavy stuff every day have to turn to humor just to get through it. Why are they both perverts, and why did he write this joke? Honestly though, I feel like dialogue about the night Michael came back would have been at least compelling to listen to. Maybe these guys were there the night Michael killed his sister and stepdad. Having that connection there would have been really interesting. I know I shouldn't be focusing on this scene of the film so much, but this is your first taste of how disgusting this film can be. This may be one of my most weird critiques of this movie, but has anyone noticed how Haddonfield went from like a small town with houses close together and a small town feel to a wide field in a Midwest plain? There are cornfields, country roads, the Brackett's house is in the middle of nowhere, and the Myers house seems to have been picked up and placed in the middle of a cornfield somewhere. Halloween 1 and 2 feel like they take place in the same town, while 4 and 5 maintain that as well. It makes the film seem connected in more than just plot. We were familiarized with the setting of the first, and now we are shoved into this open, cold, and bland field where Michael walks around without a mask. It's just a bit puzzling to me. It really took me out of the movie even the first time I saw it. The characterization of everybody in this movie is just really tough to swallow. I'd say the only person that is sympathetic in any way is the sheriff. Lori, even though she's had terrible things happen to her, is a terrible person, objectively. And even though Annie has had a lot of things happen to her, she is portrayed as just a bitch too. Like I said earlier, it just makes the film super hard to watch. But I think if Zombie was better at subtext, better at nuance, that trying to describe how Lori and Annie are going through their emotions is a lot more under the surface and less in your face, it would have made the movie a lot more watchable. Now, as I'm writing this, I realize I am writing a lot of negative about this film. But I have to mention one last thing before I move on to my positives. That damned white horse. Why does this portion of the film exist? Coupling this with Laurie's hallucinations make this whole subplot a waste of time. We don't need a dumb reason for Michael to keep trying to find Laurie. Even if Zombie wanted this included, there was more subtle ways to have Michael trying to appease the white horse. Maybe trying to keep the white horse figure, or finding another one in his house. Cut the Sherry Moon stuff. Cut it out almost entirely. Include her in 1 or 2 scenes. Not practically all of them with Michael.
I want to show you something. All right.
It's obvious I'm not the biggest fan of these movies, but that was not always the case. When I was 16, I was convinced this entry was the most artistic and well done. Some of my attitude from that period in life has carried over, however, and there are some parts of this film that I actually really enjoy. Michael Myers is terrifying. His introduction in the hospital scene is absolutely gripping. It's an uncomfortable scene, but in the right way. Octavia Spencer is just a sweet lady, and seeing her get hacked to death is what horror is meant to be. Horrific. Michael continues to be scary throughout the film, even without a mask. And when he does put on the mask, it makes every scene feel a bit special. The scenes without Sherry Moon Zombie are all pretty good. Tyler Mane, once again, makes a great Michael. His walk is intimidating. The physicality he brings is such a terrifying presence to these two films. Speaking of kills, the makeup and gore in both of these films are actually pretty on point. I can't think of anything that looks fake or ridiculous, and that is a true feat in the slasher genre. Cinematography is on point as well. Since the film was shot in 16mm, there's an obvious film grain without super shallow depth of field, and to me it makes the film less personal and not so warm. It fits in with the emotion Zombie is trying to bring out in the viewer. Unlike the first film, there are no warm colors. Almost everything has a blinding white light or a bluish tint to it. Like everything else in this film, it's oppressive. With that nuance and style that is pumped into this aspect of the film, it works extremely well. Now, I do think the ending in both cuts are done pretty well. In the director's cut, it ends on an extremely final note with everybody dying, Michael, Laurie, and Loomis. It has the closure that I want from the final entry in a series. The final shot is chilling too. Seeing Laurie just smile into the camera, but seeing that damned white horse is a little stupid. It really sums up my feelings on the entry. I'm just glad it's over. H2, Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, whatever you want to call it, gets 55 out of 100.